New polling in the aftermath of the first presidential debate paints a kind of a mixed picture for President Biden. According to a Wall Street Journal poll last week, 76% of Democrats think President Biden is too old to run this year. But according to a national poll commissioned by a top Democratic pollster this week, when asked if they would vote for Biden anyway in order to keep Trump out of the White House, 75% of Democrats who responded said yes. Joining me now is FERNAND, AMANDI, a Democratic pollster and an MSNBC political analyst. FERNAND, these numbers are so confusing. Please help me understand them. I mean, does this explain why President Biden is reluctant to do anything here? Because yes, Democrats may think he shouldn't be on the top of the ticket, but they're almost overwhelmingly going to still vote for him anyway.
Well, Alex, you're exactly right. I mean, the numbers are a little schizo, but the reason for that kind of contradictory numbers that you see in those two polls, I think really can be answered in two words, and that's Donald Trump. The fact of the matter is, Alex, whoever the Democratic nominee is, Democrats are going to vote for that individual en masse, because the only thing that matters is who the Republican nominee is. And the idea now that there's a lot of questions about whether or not it's going to be Joe Biden as the nominee or not, that really is kind of immaterial, because there is going to be a focusing of the mind once we are past the point of no return, whether that's President Biden as the Democratic nominee, Kamala Harris, or someone else. And the stakes will then become clear that this is an election that is a choice between American democracy and the continuance of it after 248 years, or a conscientious movement into autocracy and authoritarian dictatorship, as Donald Trump himself has pledged to be on more than one occasion, Alex, on day one.
Yeah, it also, I mean, to your point, it could be President Biden, it could be Vice President Harris, it could be, I don't know, a Democratic governor unnamed as yet. But the fact of the matter you're saying is that that Democratic resistance to Donald Trump, the feeling that he poses an existential threat to democracy, is strong enough, is motivating enough that Democrats are going to basically go with whoever's at the top of the ticket.
There's no doubt about it. And the poll that I just conducted yesterday, the national poll, to me, Alex, there was a stark number there, maybe the most important one that, in my judgment, is one that Democrats should take heart of. And that is, we asked the question, do you think if Donald Trump is elected to another term, will he and his administration represent a grave threat to American democracy continuing in the United States? 53% of all voters, including 22%, by the way, of Republicans, answered yes to that question. So if the Democrats can, again, make this case and make this election choice a referendum between what Biden would represent, or whoever the Democratic nominee is, which is continuing the way the country has been the world superpower as a functioning democracy and republic, or this dictatorship authoritarian project that we see the 2025 project and other areas articulating that it would be commenced under Trump, that choice is the choice that this election is going to be ultimately defined around.
Fernand, I'm going to ask you a question I don't know if you know the answer to, so bear with me. But you say there are 22% of Republicans who find Trump distasteful, that are alarmed by Donald Trump, that think he poses a grave danger to the republic. Do you think that sense of alarm is as powerful as the Democratic sense of alarm that Republicans will pull the lever for whoever isn't Donald Trump in November?
Well, look, I mean, I think the question that you mentioned earlier, would folks vote for, if it's President Biden who's the nominee, regardless of what happens, if he shows signs of advanced aging and is unable to complete a full 4-year term into the future? Only 44% said they would do that just to stop Donald Trump. That's where you kind of see that other question where 53%, a majority, are saying they believe Trump is a threat to the democracy. So you do have some folks in the middle. A lot of them are probably not watching this program candidly. We are all the junkies here. I think everyone watching tonight knows the stakes. But those voters that are maybe not as attuned to the process, they may have concerns about Donald Trump, of course, but at the same time, they look at some of the issues around President Biden. It's not quite enough for them to necessarily vote against Trump when they see the concerns about President Biden.
It's hard to understand whether aside from, the reality of the calendar, it's hard to understand what the urgency, like whether there is a point at which, whether there is a point of no return for this Democratic debate about who should be at the top of the ticket. I mean, given the sense of alarm, the distaste for Trump, I mean, that seems baked in. I wonder if there's a point at which the Democratic family conversation do you think needs to end, you know, in terms of public support for the party itself?
You know, that's a great question, Alex. It has a very clear answer. Once the Democratic convention is over and we have our nominee as a party, that is when the conversation will come to a complete halt. And I anticipate, at least at that point, Democrats will come together as a Democratic family and get behind the nominee. The question, however, is between now and then, there is still an opportunity, whether, again, it's President Biden or someone else. That decision is still not defined. And that's why I think you have this consensus. Had this happened later in the process, I think you would still see the Democratic Party completely in lockstep behind President Biden. The reason right now that this anxiety exists is because under no circumstances can Donald Trump be permitted to win the election because of the grave threat he would represent.
FERNAND, AMANDI, thank you for helping break down some seemingly impenetrable numbers. I appreciate it. That is our show for this evening.